Okay, well, I'd like to welcome everyone to today's session on navigating the IRB submission process. This is being presented in response to numerous requests by residents and fellows for some guidance on human subjects research and how to go about submitting a proposal to the Institutional Review Board, or IRB. As you know, the IRB reviews proposals to determine whether the proposals involve human subjects or are exempt from the requirements for human subjects research. And I'm delighted to introduce Megan Richmond, who will give the presentation today. She's a senior analyst from our IRB office, and she's also with Mount Sinai's Program for the Protection of Human Subjects. Megan is a certified IRB professional, or CIP, and she's been at Mount Sinai for almost 7 years working with the IRB. She reviews proposals as an analyst. She's also authorized as a designated reviewer. She also heads most of the educational support by the IRB, giving presentations such as the one that we'll hear today, and developing educational materials and training new staff in the IRB office. So Megan, thank you very much for agreeing to give this presentation.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the introduction.
I'm sorry, yeah. I'm sorry, that little thing is floating in the middle there.
I will say, got it?
Yeah.
All right. So thanks for the introduction. I'm going to give you guys an overview today of the IRB submission process. I'm going to go through the purpose of the IRB, some basic definitions, what you'll need to submit, and other tips on the process. For any questions that you guys have, those of you here in person, you can just raise your hand at any point. On Zoom, if you have questions, you can put them in the chat and we'll take a look at those at the end. I think seems like the best way to go about that. Okay, so let's get right into it. So what is the Institutional Review Board? So IRBs are mandated by the government to review and approve research on human subjects. All IRBs follow the same umbrella of federal regulations, but each institution also has its own policies in place in addition to those regulations. So IRB processes can vary from institution to institution. These examples I've listed here, Nazi experiments and the Tuskegee syphilis study, I'm sure you guys know all about. Essentially, it's events like these in history that gave rise to codes of ethics, such as the Nuremberg Code, and then later on the Belmont Report, which classified the basic ethical principles of human subjects research as justice, respect for persons, and beneficence. And so the IRB was created to make sure that these ethical principles are followed. So the IRB is tasked with reviewing and approving projects that meet the definition of human subjects research, and the regulations have specific definitions for this. So how do we define research? Research is a systematic investigation, including research, development, testing, and evaluation, designed to develop or contribute to generalizable knowledge. And so the keywords here are systematic and generalizable. Something like a case report, for example, wouldn't be considered systematic. So case reports generally don't require IRB review because they don't meet this definition of research. And something like a QI project, quality improvement, quality assurance, these things that are intended to impact the institution only, so likely wouldn't lead to publication, wouldn't be considered generalizable, and so also wouldn't meet the definition of research. And I'll talk a little bit more about case reports and QI in a little bit. So now, how do the regulations define a human subject? A human subject is a living individual about whom an investigator obtains data through intervention or interaction with the individual, or obtains identifiable private information. And so the keywords here are living, intervention and interaction, and identifiable. And so if all of your research is on, say, deceased donor samples, then that doesn't require IRB review because that doesn't meet the definition of human subjects. Collecting data through intervention or interaction, relatively clear. If you're intervening on their care, or an interaction could be something as simple as asking them to complete a survey, then those things would be human subjects research. It's important to understand also that you don't necessarily need to be interacting directly with human subjects at all for it to meet our review. If you're interacting with their identifiable private information, that does require our review. So for example, and we get so many of these, a retrospective chart review. So we've defined research and human subjects, and now, so for a study to require IRB review, it has to be determined to meet both of these definitions, to be research involving human subjects. So a little bit more detail about quality assurance or quality improvement. So while they may involve human subjects, they do not meet the definition of research. A working group from the Hastings Center defines them as systematic, data-guided activities designed to bring about immediate improvements in health delivery in particular settings. So this doesn't meet the definition of research because while it may be systematic, it's not considered generalizable since it's designed to only impact Mount Sinai and improve the quality of care. If you're conducting a QA or QI study, instead of coming to the IRB, you should go to your departmental QA, QI committee, and they would let you know if you're all set to proceed with the work you want to do, or if it may actually be research and to submit to the IRB. So now, a case report is a retrospective analysis of a single case. So while it may contribute to generalizable knowledge, it's not systematic, and so therefore it does not meet the definition of research. For a single case, you do not need to tell the IRB about it at all. If there's more than one case, at this point, you should come and talk to us, and we'll determine whether or not a submission is required for our review. And so you'll email our office. Our way of kind of going about this, our standardized way, would be for you to email our office at irb@mssm.edu with case report or case series information in the subject line, and provide all the information listed here point by point. This is also, we have a guidance document on case reports on our website that includes this process, but you would make sure to have your name, your department, your contact information, telling us whether you think your case report is a systematic investigation, whether you think it's designed to contribute to generalizable knowledge, if the patients within your case report are your own patients, or if not, to otherwise specify your patient source, and then the number of records that you plan to include. And so this information here would be enough for the IRB to get that email, take a look at it, and decide whether or not we should tell you to submit a submission or if you're good to go. So now that we know how to define human subjects research, let's talk about the different levels of review in our office. So first, we might determine that your study does not meet the definition of human subjects research. Please note that our office does not need to actually make these determinations for you. Study investigators make this determination on their own. And we have a helpful guide for this on our website that helps you walk through how to make that determination, basically going through the definitions that I just explained on the research and human subjects slides. And so you can use that as a sort of checklist. So, and generally, we do occasionally need to make these determinations for you if, for example, a funding agency, you get an NIH grant or something, and they could request that the IRB makes a determination, in which case we would need a full submission to review. So now the next two levels of review here, exempt and expedited, have somewhat misleading names. They both refer specifically to the federal regulations, and each has a set of categories that your study must fit into in order to qualify for that determination. Exempt research is a bit misleading, as it is called exempt research, because while not human subjects research projects do not require an IRB submission, exempt research does. The IRB must make the determination of exemption. We don't approve exempt projects, we administratively review them and make exempt determinations. And so once a determination of exemption is made, that means that it's a minimal risk project that is exempt from the regulations. And so further submissions to our office about the project are not needed, such as continuing reviews, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. The only time that you would need to submit something after getting an exempt determination is if you plan to make a change to that study that might make it no longer meet the specific criteria of exemption that it was determined. And so for any case like that, we would recommend that you just come and speak to us, email, call us before making the submission, and we could talk about it. And we would let you know whether or not a submission is actually needed. And common examples of exempt research would be things like chart reviews where you're not recording any identifiers, or surveys where there's no sensitive information being collected. The expedited categories also refer to minimal risk research, but they do require our review and approval and are not exempt from the regulations. If you need to make any change to an expedited project, you do need to submit it to us as a modification for approval before you can implement the change that you plan. Examples of studies meeting expedited criteria would be a blood draw under 50 mLs, a non-invasive specimen collection, or a chart review where you are going to be keeping a link to identifiers. And expedited is a bit of a misleading name because you hear expedited and you think this means fast, but it really is just a determination category from the regulations. Now, for all the levels of review that we've discussed so far, the determinations or approvals are completed in our office by a designated non-committee reviewer. This last level of review is full board, which means it's considered greater than minimal risk and requires review at a convened IRB meeting. If a study doesn't fit into any of the exempt or expedited criteria, then it has to go to the full board. Our IRB has convened meetings weekly to review and discuss these projects, and then determinations are made there. Examples of full board projects would be your investigational drug or device studies. So now that we've gone over the levels of review, let's talk about the different types of IRB submissions, some of which I've already mentioned. A new study, self-explanatory, you have a new proposal that has not yet been reviewed by the IRB. I'll talk in more detail in a bit about the specific requirements, but essentially, you'll be submitting all of your protocol documentation to us for the first time in the Ruth system. As a quick note, Ruth is the name of our IRB submission system. I'll mention certain things about it throughout the rest of this presentation, but there's specific Ruth training videos that you can watch, and so I won't go into a huge amount of detail now. If we have some time at the end, maybe we can go in there and I can show you a little bit. And there's also, I will have a link to where the training videos are as well that will be provided. So next, continuing review or progress report. So for expedited and full board projects, we require continuing reviews to be submitted. For all full board projects, these are going to need to be submitted annually. And for most expedited projects, it's every 3 years. And now, I don't know if you guys will be working primarily on new studies or if you're going to be added to existing studies. Excuse me. But a side note is that there are a number of existing expedited projects that were under older regulations, and those will require annual review, just like the full board projects. And so any project that requires continuing review is going to have an expiration date. If you don't submit the continuing review in time for us to review and approve it before the expiration date, it's important to note that approval can lapse and you shouldn't be conducting any research-related activities until the approval is obtained. And so we ask for those submissions of around 6 weeks prior to expiration just to account for anything. A modification, again, pretty self-explanatory. Anytime you want to make a change to an approved study, you need to submit it to the IRB as a modification for review and approval prior to implementing the change. Modifications might be as small as increasing your target enrollment goal to as big as something like adding a control cohort that wasn't there before. If you implement any changes prior to our approval, then you may need to submit the next submission type, a reportable new information. And so these submissions are needed when certain things considered reportable happen, such as a protocol violation or an unexpected adverse event. We call these RNIs for short. And so an RNI is expected to be submitted within 5 days of discovery of the information. So if you're ever not sure if there's something that's happened and if it needs to be reported or not, you can always reach out to our office and we'll be happy to talk it out with you and guide you. Yes?
When I'm submitting modification, or requesting modification, I can work with that project just not using the modification as long as it's not approved, right?
Right. So if there's a change you want to implement,
Yeah.
You have to wait until the IRB approval is issued before you can do that thing.
So I can do the modification, but I can still work on the already approved part of the
Yes,
protocol.
yes, absolutely. Mhm.
Right.
Unless, there might be a safety related reason that
Sure.
something's being changed, but, that would be at the discretion of the investigator. And if there's something that needs to be implemented right away, then that would be a discussion with the IRB chairs. But generally, yes, keep working on your project. Okay, so now that we've gone through the basic definitions that you'll need to know, let's get into the actual process. And so we have this little diagram here to show the 3 offices that you'll have to work with. At the top of, we call this the FIG triangle. The top of the FIG triangle is the Financial Conflict of Interest Office. And so for all study submissions, the FCOI office will be involved. The first thing you should do when you're preparing a submission is go into the e-disclosure management system, or EDMS, and create what they call a triggering event for their study. And so on the triggering event form, you'll list all of the research personnel who will be on the study, and then each person has to go into EDMS and submit their FCOI disclosure. You shouldn't submit your study to the IRB until this triggering event is complete and ready to go. When you create that triggering event, there will be a TE number associated with each form that you'll need, and I'll get to that in a little bit. Now, the IRB and GCO are together here underneath at the bottom of the FIG triangle because your reviews can happen concurrently. We, of course, have the IRB office, us, and your submission to us will be in Ruth, our electronic submission system. The Grants and Contracts Office uses InfoEd as their submission system. And so now this, the GCO corner of the FIG triangle is potentially not applicable to you. You'll only need to submit to them if you're receiving any external funding or if you need some kind of agreement endorsed by their office, like a data use agreement. But if your study is school-sponsored and doesn't require any kind of agreement, then you won't need to talk to the GCO, you can ignore that part of the triangle. So now I'm just going to run through a checklist of things to make sure are done or included before you submit a new study. If there's a detailed checklist available in the Ruth library, which at the end I can show you guys if that would be of use or if there's time. So for this, I'll just run through what we have. And so you'll want to, of course, first check to make sure that all of your personnel have logged into Ruth and uploaded a copy of their CV or resume or biosketch to their user profiles. And so this is only going to be needed the first time that anyone logs into Ruth. You won't be able to submit without everyone having done this, so it's among the first things you should remind your team to do if they haven't already, in order to avoid any delays and you're otherwise set to go. Now, when you actually click into Ruth to create a new submission, the first thing you'll be asked for is that TE number that I mentioned earlier. And so this is the number that's associated with your triggering event in EDMS. So make sure that you have that handy when you're creating your submission in Ruth. Before submitting, you'll want to make sure that everyone has actually completed their FCOI disclosures on that triggering event. Next, you'll also want to make sure that all personnel have completed all the required city education courses. I've listed them here. And as I mentioned before, then you have to do the GCO submission if that's applicable to you. Next on the list are the HRP 503 application form and the protocol, if applicable. And I'll talk a little bit about what these two documents are and what the difference is in a couple of slides. Then next, if applicable, make sure you're attaching any consent forms or recruitment materials for our review. Now, if your research will be cancer related at all, for example, if it has cancer endpoints or it's enrolling from the cancer population, then you're going to have to first go to the PRMC, the Protocol Review and Monitoring Committee, and have them review it. We will not accept applications that are cancer related that don't have a PRMC letter attached. They might issue you, depending on what your project is, a letter of exemption or approval. So you would just make sure to include that letter as a part of your submission. There will be a place in Ruth for any other supporting documents that you may have as a part of your submission. You'll need to complete the ancillary review form in REDCap, which is linked out within the Ruth Smart form that I mentioned right here. And the Ruth Smart form is essentially the bones of the study. It's a series of questions within the system that kind of summarize certain basic information and also shows you where you would upload all of these other documents that we've mentioned here. So what is that ancillary review form that I just mentioned? So you're going to need to complete this ancillary review form at the time of submission of a new study to know which ancillary offices may also need to be assigned for review. And so the ancillary offices are the other research administration offices that may be required to review all or parts of a proposed study. And I've included a list here of all of the citrus word space of all of the possible ancillary offices that may be required. Once you complete that form, it's going to instruct you to save it as a PDF and upload it into the submission. And so when you fill that out, it's logic-based, and it'll tell you, based on the way you've answered the questions, which ancillary offices apply. An important note here is that the FCOI office, which you see listed at the end here, it is required for all submissions, new ones and continuing reviews, and also modifications that have any impact on personnel or funding. And so when you go into Ruth, there's going to be a button that says Manage Ancillary Reviews, and so that's where you go to select the required offices.
Megan, it might be worth just letting people know that we will send around your presentation to everybody afterwards so that they'll have all this information, because it's a lot.
Yes, I know. It's a lot of information I'm dumping on you. These slides will be made available. And there's also contact information and some resources that I'll point you to by the end of the presentation that hopefully will help you guys kind of navigate what we're talking about here. And so now, so that previous slide was the checklist for new studies. And so I'll just quickly run through what's needed for continuing reviews and modifications, and you'll see some similarities. For the continuing review, make sure you have your new TE number from EDMS. And so a new triggering event needs to be created annually at the time of continuing review. So you'll be asked to provide that each time. Once again, make sure on those new TEs that everyone has gone in and completed their FCOI disclosure. You'll also want to double check that everyone is up to date on their city education requirements. If your study required a GCO submission, they also need a continuing review, and so you would need to make sure that you've gotten that going. FCOI will need to be assigned as an ancillary review, so you'll need to do that. And lastly, you'll create a continuing review submission in Ruth, which has a brief SMART form that you'll fill in that asks some progress-related questions and has a space to, attach a progress report. Now for modifications, if you'll be adding any personnel, you're going to need to check on all those same kinds of things, making sure they've uploaded their CV, that they've been added to the triggering event and complete their FCOI disclosure, that they've completed their city education. If it's a funding modification, adding external funding, make sure to start a GCO submission to InfoEd. Otherwise, for any other kind of modification, just make sure that you're updating any of the protocol documents, consent forms, anything you have to reflect the changes that you're submitting. And there's a brief modification SMART form in Ruth that just asks you to summarize the modification and provide the reasoning, the rationale for that modification. So now that I've covered the basics of what's needed in terms of the actual list of documents and button clicks, let's get into the content of the submissions. And so you've heard me refer to a separate protocol document and an HRP 503 application form. So let's talk about the difference between these two documents. So for certain projects, you're going to need to attach both an HRP 503 and a protocol to your resubmission. So a protocol is defined as a carefully designed plan to safeguard the participants' health and answer specific research questions. And so the protocol, it's meant to represent the more scientific information that you're going to need to provide to us with some regulatory context. And so we're talking study background, the rationale, the design, the specific methodology, all of that. At the bottom here, I've linked the NIH protocol wizard, which is what we recommend that you use as a guidance template. Then the HRP 503 application is going to detail how you're.
Can you
yes.
tell people what is that protocol wizard? What's in it? What will it ask for?
Yeah, so there's a couple of NIH protocol templates that just, we're not saying that you have to use the exact template and fill in every single section, because it can look like a lot, especially if you're working on a minimal risk study or something like that. But it kind of just walks you through the things that are needed in a protocol. And there's a table of contents, and you can just use that and pull out the sections that are applicable to you, however it works, for whatever applies to your study that you're writing up. So the HRP 503 details how your study will be operationalized and implemented. It's here where we essentially want the local specific information like recruitment information and other details related to human subject protection that we need to know about. The HRP 503 will always be needed. Every submission will need one. But there are a few exceptions to the need for a separate protocol to be written up. Not all of the studies need that. Firstly, you may have an industry-sponsored protocol that has its own protocol already written up, or you have an NIH grant that's already written up, and either of those things can be used to fulfill a protocol requirement. And then there's also a few versions of the HRP 503 application, depending on the type of study that you're conducting. And if there's time, I can show you quickly what those look like at the end. If you're putting together a study that's strictly a record or specimen review, we have a specific HRP 503 template for that called the HRP 503R. And so when you complete that, when that application applies to your study, it does not require a separate accompanying protocol. It asks more detailed questions regarding the sources of your data, the types of data you'll be collecting, and how you'll be protecting it. And so because it is specific for these types of studies, it is standalone. It serves as the protocol on its own. And so then additionally, if your study qualifies for exemption, we have the HRP 503E version. And so for the 503E to be applicable, it has to meet one of those specific regulatory categories that I talked about towards the beginning of the presentation. And those exact core categories are listed directly in the 503E document, and you have to pick the one that you think your study meets. And so if you take a look through that and you're not sure if your study fits into a category, it's always best, again, to just reach out to one of us in the office and talk it out to make sure that we're sending you down the right road, that you don't waste time filling out the wrong template, and so that everything's squared away. The 503E, again, it stands alone and doesn't require a separate protocol document. And so all of these templates are available in the library, which hopefully I'll have some time to show you. So now I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail on this, but the main thing for you all to know right now is that we have an existing consent form template that you need to use when you're creating consent forms. And so listed here are the regulatory requirements of informed consent, but you do not need to memorize these. They are all built into our template. So as long as you follow the instructions of the template and don't remove any sections, then you're going to be appropriately compliant with the required elements. It's also important to remember that consenting is not just about the form itself, it's also a process. And so we ask that this process is detailed in the HRP 503 application. There's going to be a section there with some instructional text on what we're looking for. There's also an SOP outlining the expectations, and so you can read through that we point to it as a part of the template. And so you can read through that and attest to following it as a part of your protocol. If you're doing something like a retrospective chart review, you may want to request a waiver of informed consent. And so what's important to know about this is that there are specific criteria in the federal regulations. That's the theme here, huh? There's all these criteria that we have to meet in order for the study to qualify for the waiver. And so a part of the HRP 503R, the one that's specific for chart reviews, that application outlines the criteria, and that's where you can explain your justification for meeting them. And so among other things, one of them would be you would need to explain why your research would not be able to be logistically conducted without the waiver. And so that's part of the things that you would need to justify. Often for retrospective chart reviews, logistically, we want to look at 1,000 charts from the last 10 years. People aren't coming here anymore, their contact information is outdated, things like that, that would count as justification for needing it. Another thing to note about a consent waiver is that if you're requesting one, you must also request a waiver of HIPAA authorization. And so to access someone's protected health information, or PHI, for research purposes, you need either to get HIPAA authorization from the patient, or you need to have a HIPAA waiver granted by us. And so there's a form in the Root library for requesting a HIPAA waiver that you would just attach to your Root submission. And so then lastly on this topic, if you're submitting a study that's going to qualify for exemption, you're going to use that HRP 503E application, and it's a study that involves interaction with participants, such as a survey study, then you won't need to obtain full consent. The elements of informed consent don't apply. And so we have a template in the Root library for a research information sheet. And so this is basically a one-pager that would cover the purpose of the study, the statement that participation is voluntary, what they'll be asked to do, the risks. And so the research information, it doesn't have a signature line. It just needs to be presented to participants before they agree to move forward. And so you would tell us in your 503E application how you're going to do that. And so, for example, what we often see, if it's an online survey study, we would expect that the information sheet is built directly into the survey platform at the beginning of the survey before they can move forward. Okay, so now that you've created your submission, you're ready to go, here's what's going to happen. And so this workflow map here is a screenshot directly from our electronic submission system from Ruth. And so each submission is going to have one of these maps on their workspace, and what happens is the orange pill will move around based on the current status or location of the submission. And so here it's showing that it's in pre-submission. This means that it hasn't yet been submitted to the IRB. And then so once you submit it, it'll move into the pre-review stage. And so here is where it's going to be assigned to an IRB analyst, it might be me, and we're going to conduct a pre-review. If we have any comments or questions, we're going to send it back to you, and it's going to go down to that clarification requested bubble. And so then this can happen back and forth as many times as needed between the study team and the analyst to get the submission into the best possible shape, make sure all of our questions are answered. And so once the analyst is satisfied, we're going to move it along to the IRB review bubble. If it's a minimal risk project, this means we're going to send it to a designated non-committee reviewer. If it's a greater than minimal risk project, this means we're assigning it to an upcoming convened meeting. Once the review is completed by the non-committee reviewer or the convened IRB has made their determination, it's going to move on to post-review. If the reviewer or the board have any revisions required, it'll come back to you in the modifications required bubble, and then your response is going to go back up to post-review. And so once these responses are completed, the analyst will process the approval and the submission will move to review complete. So now just very quickly, some information on Ruth. I've included the link here. It has a quick reminder. make sure everyone goes into Ruth and uploads their CVs to their user profiles to avoid delays down the line. Just make sure you get that out of the way. Ruth is accessible anywhere with an internet connection. You do not need to be behind the Mount Sinai firewall. If you're having any technical issues with it, you can open a ticket with IT via the help portal or just email esupport@mssm.edu. But certainly if you have any IRB related questions, you should contact our office directly. We can help you work through those. So linked on this slide at the bottom is the research roadmap. This is really a treasure trove of information about all things research at Sinai. This link specifically is to the Ruth section, and that's where our training videos are, and other, there's training videos specifically for Ruth, but also other training videos available. You can contact our office via our mainline number here, or our main email. We have a monthly clinical research forum. Details for those go out monthly on the research listserv. We also have general office hours twice a week via Zoom. And so details for that, the Zoom links are on our website, they're on the research roadmap.
Can you comment a little bit more about what happens at those office hours? What's the format?
Oh, it's great. So they're all on Zoom, and there's a few analysts assigned per session, and we have breakout rooms. People come in, and they get sent to a room with an analyst to talk about whatever they want to talk about. They can have a study that they're thinking about. They can have a Ruth problem that they want to share their screen and show us, and we're in Ruth all day, every day, so we know all the button clicks. So going to office hours is a great way to figure out that kind of thing. But yeah, if you decide to come to office hours, would recommend coming, for the Monday one, come at like 10:30, or the Wednesday one at 2:30. There's always a mad rush in the beginning, and then you might have to wait. But yeah, our office hours are a great resource.
Isn't it possible that being there at the beginning could be useful, because sometimes hearing other people's questions can be very helpful?
Well, the way we have it organized in breakout rooms, so people aren't hearing everybody's questions.
Oh, cool. Okay.
That's interesting. It just makes it easier for multiple people to be helped at the same time.
Okay.
Yeah. So, does anyone have any questions? Let's see if I can get into this, or can you get to
What's the
chat?
clinical
I'll go into the
research
chat.
forum?
Oh yeah, the clinical research forum we have monthly, and the agenda is sent via the research listserv, and the topics can vary. There's a new cybersecurity announcement, and so that team is coming, and they're gonna talk about their process, or sometimes there's just open mic questions where you can come and you can just ask questions to the PPHS about policies or things like that. If we have policy announcements that are changing, or we have new guidances that are out, we'll announce those there as well.
We do have a question in the chat.
Great.
From Sarah Diaz Sarabia. For projects with IRB exceptions, say case reports, we should still do the IRB submission with the route, right?
I'm not sure I understand.
Actually, if you don't mind stop sharing, then you'll be able to see the chat.
Yeah, I was gonna see if I can, here we go, I can. Can everyone, I guess everyone can just see my screen. For projects with IRB exemptions, say case reports, you should still do. So for case reports, it really depends. So a case report, I described on an earlier slide, generally a single case report doesn't meet the definition of human subjects research, and so you guys can make that determination on your own. If it's a single case report, you don't need to come to us. But if it's a case series, then you'll want to email us, and we can decide before you make a submission if we decide that it meets the definition of human subjects research requiring our review.
Can you see?
And there is a Q&A also. Where can we find the link
Wait,
to the
there's
Zoom?
a-
office
Sorry,
hours?
Tara, 1 second.
I'm sorry, Tara, there's underneath the first question,
Yeah, I see.
for projects using databases that are widely accessible.
Oh, sorry.
So this again, there's a lot of questions that I would have. But for a project using a publicly available database, or a widely accessible database, that likely would qualify for exemption, in which case you would submit via, using the HRP 503E and you would submit into Ruth. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. Let's take a look.
Yeah, and Q&A.
Q&A. Where can we find the link to the Zoom office hours?
We'll send around the,
Yes, so in the slides here, in the slides here, this link, the office hours information and the Zoom links are here at this link.
What's the normal turnaround time for IRB, like from submission to an answer?
Yeah, so to an answer, meaning a
Like,
final determination.
Yeah.
So we say for minimal risk projects, generally around 6 weeks. For full board projects, it would be generally 6 weeks to the date of a convened meeting. And then, there might be things that have to happen after that, but that's kind of our general sense at the moment. Let's see some more is happening in the chat. Let's see what else we got. Oh, okay. Oh, so thanks, Cecilia. We have a few minutes. If questions want to keep coming in, that's fine. But while you guys think of them, I'm gonna jump over. Everyone can see my screen, right?
Yep.
I want to make this go away. Let me do this again. So this is our website. And so if you go to get to this site, you can just Google Mount Sinai PPHS, and this will be the first link. I just wanted to show you, actually on this page as well, we have the links to our virtual office hours. They're here as well. And then our contact information is also on here. This front page is going to have news and announcements. Like, for example, we recently, in the last year, we have a new consent form template. And so there was a whole process for transitioning previously approved projects to the new template. So we had those announcements here. If we want to go to guidance and policies, we have all kinds of guidances here that are super useful. I mentioned the human subjects research determinations guidance before. The guidance on case report and case series. So this is what you would do. This has the information on what you should do if you're not sure if your case report needs IRB review. Some other guidances on just some things that come up, like how to change a study PI. There's some details on R&I reporting. These are pretty new. And then just if you want to apply for a certificate of confidentiality, we have a new guidance on that. And then other general information, screening guidelines, recruitment guidelines, our consent form SOP, policies on translations and short forms, some guidances about future use, data sharing, data security policies. And then the other main thing I wanted to show you guys, I'm gonna have to log back in. Oh, that's not useful. Okay, so I'm in Ruth, ruth.mssm.edu. In case you're wondering, Ruth is named after Dr. Ruth Abramson, who was the much beloved founder of our IRB here at Sinai. And so if you click on IRB and library, we have all kinds of things here. And so what I want to specifically show you in the templates tab, this would be our HIPAA waiver form. Here we have all of our consent templates. This is the standard one for adults. We have a Spanish version. There's a lot of consent templates, but it's all variations on the same thing. Parental permission, English and Spanish, all things like that. And then at the end, on the third page over here, are the 3 different HRP 503 applications. So the full one that goes with the protocol, the 503E, that's our exempt determination application, and the 503R, that's for our record or specimen reviews. And then we also have the template over here for the exempt research information sheet. What's on the fourth page? NCI studies, don't worry about that. And then in the checklist section, I wanted to show you guys, if you're ever doing a study that involves one of these populations, then you would be asked to fill out one of these checklists. Often, the children one, or pregnant women, or cognitively impaired. These are used a lot. And then I really want to show you guys these right here. So these are checklist guides that we've written up for initial submissions, continuing reviews, and modifications. And so there's slides in my presentation that showed you that had checklists on them, but these are even, these are a little bit more narrative and kind of write out the things that I described while I was talking.
Can you show us
Yeah, let's
an
click
example?
into this one.
Oh, I see, they're downloaded forms.
Yes, they're Microsoft Word. So study personnel section, all these things with the CV, EDMS, the city courses. So and then after you do those things, it kind of walks you through which 503 you should use. If you're using the 503R or E, they're the standalone protocol. Consent form. So yeah, this is a checklist going through all of those, if applicable, do these things forms.
Thank you so much.
There is somebody else in the chat.
Let's see. From Dennis. Are there any most common reasons for a project to be requested clarifications? Oh, what an excellent question. There's many things. So I work primarily on what we call the expedited team, but really it's the minimal risk research. So I'm reviewing all of these 503Rs, 503Es all day long. Frequent comments, people don't do the FCOI stuff. And, it's FCOI's job to manage what's going on with the triggering event in EDMS, but we're still kind of keepers in the root system. So we are making sure that you're assigning ancillary review and all of that. So people forget to do that. In chart review studies, a frequent thing would be people not submitting their data collection sheet or not submitting their HIPAA waiver. You'll see the trend here is people just not including required documents. And so using those checklists is going to be really helpful to kind of just get past the common issues that we see as analysts. That's what
You had, you showed before some links that people could click on for the office hours. Does that mean you choose the time and the day you want to go and you click on that link and you're automatically there?
Yeah, it's literally the Zoom link. And it's the Mondays 10 to 11 or Wednesdays 2 to 3. If you try to go to one of those links not during those times, nothing happens.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dennis. You have a question from Raquel. For studies using specimens from the biorepository, I guess one could build a waiver from consent, waiver of HIPAA authorization, as these are de-identified specimens, would that also qualify for an HFP 503? So there's a few things to think about here. So if you're going to use, one of the institution's universal biorepositories and you, the researcher, are not going to be accessing any identifiers at any point, they're just giving you, a de-identified data set with no links, then that isn't human subjects research. The majority of the time, you wouldn't need to submit to us at all. If you're going to be having links to identifiers, then probably we would jump straight to the 503R rather than the 503E. The 503E, as far as specimens, it's hard for me to think of a time where the use of specimens would qualify, because it would either be not human subjects research or need the 503R. I hope that answers your question, Raquel. If you have any
For
follow-up.
the biorepository, would you have to fill out a waiver of informed consent?
So, it depends what you're getting from the biorepository. So if it's not human subjects research, then the regulations don't apply, and so you don't need to request those waivers from us. It's possible the biorepository asks you to attest to some things, but that would be separate from our process.
So to summarize, you've gone through a lot of information. For somebody who's just starting and not familiar with the IRB system and wants to start a project, where is the first place they should go just to get started, to get their feet wet?
So I would say to go to, sorry, this is I'm scrolling in the wrong direction. On our website, there's just a For Researchers tab. And so this just kind of summarizes some of the really basic stuff that I talked about. It says, these are the systems that you'll have to use. It has our rapid turnaround times. It's not doesn't matter as much.
But
here,
for example, would you suggest that people, everyone has to do the financial conflict of interest for any kind of project, but would you suggest they go directly to Ruth and just get started there and familiarize themselves with that? Because you've told us about a lot of different offices and a lot of different sites. So
yeah.
what's the simplest way for someone to get started who's never done this before?
Yeah, so I guess going to that checklist in Ruth and then just reading the items on the checklist and trying your hand at it, right? If there's anything on the checklist that isn't clear to somebody looking at it for the first time, then, pop into office hours, talk to us. Our office hours we have people coming in who just say, I'm new to Sinai, what do I need to do to start a submission in office hours? And that's like the best question that can come in, and I love when they come in and talk to us because.
Okay, so I think that's very useful for everybody to know.
And I know that it can be very overwhelming. I just showed you so many different documents. And in a given study that you're submitting, certain parts of those things are going to be applicable, certain things aren't. And we recognize, sometimes because we're doing this all day, every day, I can go on and on and on about all the details of this, but I recognize that, you might just have to do this for the first time, and those checklists were designed to try and help you with this, but we are available to answer questions.
Okay.
Really all the time. Yeah.
When I want to start a new study, do I start with creating the submission in Ruth and then fill out all the documents, or do I start collecting all the documents and when I have them, create the submission?
Yeah, so the Ruth system, when you go to create a submission, what you'll find is it's primarily a document storage system.
Okay.
And so you can certainly go in there and it asks some yes or no questions. Is your study relying on an external IRB? Does it involve imaging? Like there's some yes or no questions that give us a basic sense of what's going on that you could do right away. But really you're gonna just then need to just fill out those documents and attach them.
And this is something where people can go in, do part of it, save their work, and then come back at a later time.
Absolutely, yeah. But when you go to, there's the Create New Study Submission button, and when you go to do that, you have to have a TE number to be able to get going with everything else. So you have to, the very first thing you have to do when you're actually starting a submission is go into EDMS and start the trigger.
Okay, so that is the place where you have to start.
Yeah, I mean, you're not learning anything from going there, but that is actually the first thing you have to do.
Then I just have a number and work with that.
Yeah, the triggering event doesn't need to all be done for you to be able to get started in Ruth. It just the TE number needs to be generated, which I think the e-disclosure management system is fairly new, but I'm sure that it works where you can edit it periodically. Like it's also the same where you can save and go back to it.
Who can do this? Does it have to be the PI or can I do it as well? It's just a member of our research team.
Most things, yeah, the member of the research team can really get all that stuff going. The PI is going to have to be the one there's certain buttons that only the PI is going to have, or the PI can designate a PI proxy in the root system as well, that person will also have certain capabilities. But the PI ultimately has to be the one to submit.
Okay.
But really the research coordinator or manager, whoever it is, can go in and write up everything and set up the whole submission.
Great.
Any other questions come up? No, doesn't look like it.
Well, if there are no more questions, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we will be sending around the presentation to
Yes.
everybody afterwards.
Thank you so much for having me. And you could also, the last thing I'll say is you could contact, our website has, I should have showed you this too, I just thought of it, sorry. Meet the team. My whole team is listed, and our phone numbers and our email addresses. So, if you want to just talk to me rather than go to the IRB main line or anything like that, you can just email me or call me directly. That's also fine. All right. Thank you for having me.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.